This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
So first, I'd really like to thank Tina and Monica for their interesting papers, which I also found very moving. And I begin the response, and I'm delighted to close the papers presented as part of what's been just a lovely day, which I've really enjoyed, with two quotes which I feel encapsulate the situation of the mothers whose stories we've heard in this session, and which affect employed mothers more broadly. One is from the UK government report Fairness and Freedom, which states there is one factor that above all leads to women's inequality in the labour market, and that is becoming mothers. And the other is from Joan Acker, who I think perfectly summarises the situation for employed mothers in her observation how, in the context of management and organisation, women's maternal bodies, their ability to procreate, their pregnancy, breastfeeding and childcare are treated as suspect, stigmatised and used as grounds for control and exclusion. My response to Tina and Monica centres on the idea that the maternal body is subject to exclusion and control within both workplace and maternal space. By control, I mean the control exerted upon mothers, maternity and the maternal body by the expectations of others, but also the control which the mothers in Monica's and Tina's narratives are required to exercise upon themselves in managing their maternity and their infant children. I suggest that the mothers in Tina's and Monica's narratives feel it incumbent upon them to erase their bodies respectively from workplace and maternal space. In Monica's narrative, based upon Covito's story, we see a mother obliged to erase maternity and the needy bodies of her infant children so that they don't spill over into her workplace space. Conversely, in Tina's paper, mothers, with perhaps the exception of Philippa, are beset with guilt should they allow employment or personal work orientation to encroach on the space which is reserved for maternity for what is socially defined as good motherhood. I've detected in Tina's and Monica's papers two overarching themes which are central within the narratives offered by the mothers whose stories we heard in this session, and which underpin the theme of erasure. These are precarity and isolation, both challenges which appear to mark the experience of being a recent mother who is employed. So the first of these which I will look at is the notion of precarity. And this is perhaps most acutely expressed and felt by the mother featured in Covito's short story. This mother demonstrates how she is committed, competent and on top of her role before her twins arrive. Yet the onset of motherhood and the point at which she becomes a part-time worker mark the moment when her working life becomes precarious. Such precarity, I suggest, extends beyond the letter of the law and beyond notions of this mother's rights or entitlements. It relates, I suggest, to a deeper and more fundamental resistance to the notion of maternal employment, of fear and rejection of the abject maternal body when motherhood and what Karol Wolkowitz has termed the inconvenient bodies of infant children encroach on workplace space. In Covito's short story, the mother is welcome at work only if she separates maternity from work, in this case by working full-time, concealing the bodies of her infant children so they don't disrupt or leak into workplace space. The bodies of her infant twins must be kept away from the workplace routine. Collection from nursery at 4 p.m, only serving to underline and remind colleagues that this worker is also a mother, with a body which must attend to the needs of infant children, as well as the calls of the workplace. Remembering Coburn's 1991 observations, any suggestion, discussion or accommodation of maternity brings to this workplace a whiff of the nursery. And it's made plain to this mother that she must pay for that. No matter how hard she works, her mothering, her maternal body is seen in her story to transform her working life from honeymoon to nightmare. For the mothers in Tina's paper, the problems are different, but I'm going to argue that the results are in a way similar. Perhaps notions of right and entitlement may smooth the path to part-time working more easily for some women in the UK than is the case in Italy. I think it's important to acknowledge here that it isn't the situation for all UK women, many of whom are still refused the option of part-time work, and often those who achieve this might find themselves downgraded or demoted. Nevertheless, on paper at least, it would seem that options for part-time work are more available in the UK than they are in Italy. However, the politics of exclusion, control, and consequent erasure of the employed body from maternal space are apparent in these mothers' accounts. So Tina's paper is infused with the deep sense of guilt experienced by the women she interviews, and she reflects the ambivalence they feel about acknowledging their own work orientation, their need, and in some cases deep-seated desire to pursue both income and a sense of self through paid work. The women in Tina's paper are controlled by social narratives of maternity and expectations that new mothers should prioritise the nurture of the bodies of their infant children in a manner which doesn't appear to impact on fathers. Tina's mothers appear all to be in heterosexual couples, yet the responsibility for the physical well-being of these children rests entirely with the women. There appears no expectation that fathers will arrange or evaluate childcare. Mothers' paid work and work orientation in this story is characterised by guilt. Guilt built upon social expectations that, with motherhood, should arrive low work orientation. Employed mothers in Tina's paper feel they must work twice as hard to be seen to be doing a good job not only in their paid work but also as mothers. If the maternal body must be erased from workplace space, then so must, apparently, commitment to paid work be erased from maternal space, and mothers who are not at work feel obliged to devote all remaining space and time in person to children's needs. My final point concerns the lack of collectivity in both these stories. Tina and Monica observe how employed mothers seem cloaked within a lonely and isolated adult world. The mother in Covito's story is alone. The good fairy equal opportunities advisor flies in but flies out again, leaving this woman to cope in isolation with cold criticism and the identity of bad example. The women in Tina's interviews explain their feelings of isolation and friendlessness. Motherhood is a lonely road in which expectations are high, boundaries between work and home must not be crossed, and the maternal body is continually under surveillance. Whether at work or at home, some part of the maternal self must be erased. So in conclusion, I suggest that what these papers tell us, depressingly, is how little seems to have changed over many decades. It matters little whether policies are robust, whether mothers are supposedly offered equality of opportunity, whether they can work part-time. Today's mothers are still in a position where they can't win. If they're employed, then in the context of their maternal space, they must downplay this or risk criticism for being too work-orientated and not good enough mothers. But when they're at work, no matter how committed, they must erase all signs of their maternity, or risk being treated, in Covito's words, as, and I quote, somebody who, because she's had children, is no longer good for anything. So this leaves a worrying sense that employed mothers remain in an impossible position under undue and unfair pressure to erase maternity and the maternal body out of the workplace and to erase work from maternal space. And I'm going to end just by joining the stories of the mothers in Monica's and Tina's papers with a story from one mother that I interviewed called Amelia. And you'll see the reason why I've just included a quote from Amelia is because she actually uses the language of erasure to describe her own situation. She's very frightened of losing her role at work, and her story, which starts at the point when I begin it but goes right through to when she's actually had 2 children, is all about the erasure of the maternal body. So this story begins when she's trying to have a child, and she returns to work after she's had a hospital-induced miscarriage, and she pretends that nothing has happened. So she returned to work and gave an important presentation one Monday, and she quotes, "As normal, following this hospital-induced miscarriage," and these are Amelia's words, "I got pregnant again, and that pregnancy failed, and that was dire. I went for the scan and they said, sorry, it's not alive, we can't find a heartbeat. So I didn't tell anyone at work at all, and they booked me into hospital where they said, okay, it will be induced. So the worst thing was, They booked me in on the Saturday, and I had to give a presentation on the Monday, and I didn't tell anybody at work. And the inducement, or whatever it was awful. The pain was unbelievable, worse than anything I've had in my life. They gave me the strongest morphine that you're allowed, and I was on this trip where the wallpaper just came off the wall and I was completely spaced out. So I had all that, which went on all Sunday, till Sunday evening when it had worked, and then they sent me home. I then had to give this presentation, and that was hard. So on Monday, I put my suit on and went to work and did this presentation. And I never said anything to anyone. And that was hard because I was really screwed up in my head at that time. And I've just added that in because when she was summarising this and other parts of her story, Amelia actually said, I erased my body completely from work. I think that the papers today leave us with some questions which we can all perhaps think about, but we can't answer today, I'm guessing. Why are women so isolated? Why do these mothers feel so isolated in both the papers when there are many women trying to combine motherhood with employment? What has changed in terms of women's employment, and why have some things apparently not changed? Why are the ways of being so persistent? And then finally, how do we reconcile what Houseman terms the feminist politics of motherhood with what's happening to the mothers in Tina's and Monica's papers in practice to their everyday experience? So thank you.
Now on the floor to some questions and reflections. Do you have, who would like to start? Okay, anybody would like? Yes, Claire.
I'm still sort of reeling from that story that you told at the end, which is just horrific, really, to think that she could do that to herself. But the end of the Covito story does end with a perhaps a sort of fairy tale of hope that she and her girls will set up on their own. So there is a kind of potential collectivity there, and a mother-daughter, mother and daughter's kind of company that she perhaps could look forward to. That's the only kind of. But that is tempered again with the fact that she cries in the last lines. Just it's just one sort of note of collectivity that appears towards the end.
I did have a sense, though, reading the sentence, that it is delusion, that she is hoping, but in fact, perhaps we're not materialised in that story. But yes, at least there is something that the mother is very keen on sorting out also conflict between the two girls, and she said we have to sit down and really talk about what kind of women you want to become, like the fairy
penguins or ponies.
Yes, the fairy equality advisor or the bad women from my office. So maybe at least there is some reflection there on relationships between women and possible built-up solidarity between women. Any more observations? I thought I could maybe say something that, because in all the papers here, especially the ones that draw on real life stories, really emphasize the fact that there is a discrepancy between cultural norms and women's own expectations. So expectations both from outside and expectations that women, have negotiated with themselves. And I think this takes us to Lisa's question there, because is it really possible to change the world out there? It seems not, because women are in the same paradoxical situation of whatever they do, they will suffer some way. That is the same as maybe 20 years ago. But is it really that, or what is it about maternal labour that is so specific maybe to women that puts them in a situation that maybe, I don't know if I interpreted what Lisa was saying, but my question is, even if we manage to change this world and change the norms and the expectations of women and men, are we actually going to eliminate guilt, eliminate, the way women feel about motherhood. So that was something that's bothering me, has been bothering me since the second session. But as Caroline said, we probably won't be able to answer all this today.
Well, I think they're all things for us to kind of think about in terms of the future research agenda. I think one of the things that is quite complex that mothers face is the kinds of things I was talking about in the last discussion. The health narratives, the narratives about what is required of an individual woman if she's going to be a good mother, and the expectations about what Jo Brewis called the project of pregnancy, the notion that you're responsible for nurturing your pregnant body and you're then responsible for nourishing the infant with breastfeeding. Whether you do that or don't do it, it's still going to mark how you kind of evaluate yourself as a mother, whether you resist it or you go with it. And those narratives are so powerful, and they come at new mothers from all sort of aspects. And young women are sort of inculcated into these ways of thinking from a very early age, before they even reach childbearing years. They're learning about it in public health lessons at school. Health of the population is all down to whether or not mothers follow clinical advice.
I mean, I can just. For me, it's been really interesting because doing the two projects on motherhood and fatherhood and using the same interview schedule effectively for both. I mean, it's a very open-ended interview schedule, etc. And really looking at points of almost convergence in narratives and how, and particularly antenatally, was sort of looking forward and the anticipation and the trajectories of how they're going to do mothering and fathering, basically, and narratives, and then how quickly those move into, those shift. And as I said, I've written this article, it's published in Sociology in December, but it's called Falling Back into Gender. And despite all the best of intentions of really doing things differently, and really apparently wanting to do things differently, although also naively not thinking I might have to change my working hours in order to achieve that, but still this sense that I will do it, which is something in the UK. And then this sort of, but I think that becoming a parent for the first time is probably the hardest time to be sort of struggling against or trying to shake up the boss, the organisations, because you're exhausted. Everything is exhausting about becoming a parent for the first time, and new, and you're learning things, and it's it's a very complex. So many things are going on. So, but then there's real divergence, and the women, through, you saw some very small extracts there, but whenever they spoke about anything that they felt might be sort of ambivalent or slightly different to what they think the good mother should be, they would always sort of talk about, I'm not quite sure about this, but I was thinking, very tentative narratives. And when I did interviewed them just after the birth, they were talking about, if you'd come last week, I wasn't coping. But now everything's fine. When I went back at 9 to 10 months, they said, actually, when you came last time, I didn't know what happened in my life. My world felt upside down, but now I am coping. The men don't do any of that re-narrating, re-editing. They don't have to. I mean, I really found the men were looking for, lots of times men were doing practices, and Lisa and I have had discussions about this before, and I really enjoy continuing to have them, about essentialism at some level, but about, I really saw men engaging and doing practicing and developing relationships with their babies and young children that, to me anyway, look very similar to what mothers do. And so I'm so interested in actually trying to tease apart, and I thought this when we did the reading this morning, or looked at the reading, sort of caring and mothering, particularly because of this explosion of caring that I really feel is on the horizon. Well, it's taking place now, but we're just as part of an ageing society. I've actually applied to try and get some money to really tease these things apart, but also because of seeing some very similar practices between men and women, and that's why as a sociologist I'm always interested in just how we structure these things. If you give men 2 weeks paternity leave and you give women, whatever it is, 52 weeks, whatever, and I know that things are changing what does that signal in terms of who is the, who should be? So, and of course then, but women breastfeed, and there are all sorts of other bodily functions that mothers do that men can't. So there's an exclusivity as well around the mothering part. But I just, it's just such a fascinating area and so complex. And I think what I see in my research amongst particularly the women, but the men to some extent, is just them trying to sort of struggle through this morass of, a moral morass for the women in terms of what it's permissible to say. And I was talking to some midwives the other day, giving a lecture to them at Oxford Brookes, and I was just, saying you just basically have to give people permission when they go and do postnatal visits, etc., to talk about what it's really like, this isolation. And I said, if you think that we actually, if someone has a baby and we send them home to this little box by themselves to take care of the baby, and if you think that you're not doing it very well but everyone else is coping, then you're hardly likely to start talking about, I'm a terrible mother, or I can't cope with this. But that's what's mostly happening in those little boxes until people become more practiced and feel more confident about going out and showing, doing mothering in sort of public space, etc. So it can be a very isolating thing, as you said, and I think came out of the narratives. But it's just such a I'd just be interested to see in 50 years' time what women and men are sitting around talking about, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's AHRC funding for something of this order. So, because it's sort of continually changing as well, the context, and some things remaining deeply embedded.
May I? Is there somebody who wants to add something? Because Claire,
I just wanted to pick up on that Caroline word about the health agenda, and it's linked with the projects I've been working on in relation to epigenetics. I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but this is it's a big shift in biomedical research where it's being shown that what makes us who we are, in the title of that TV program, it's not the genes. Genes are a kind of resource. DNA is a resource. What makes us who we are is all the things that happen to modify our individual genomes throughout development, from the moment of fertilization and indeed before that. And some research which has been doing the rounds and has been taken up by social scientists. I went to a large conference in Edinburgh. It was an appalling experience. There's this guy called Michael Meany who's done this research on rat pups.
Oh, I know.
Have you heard this?
It's terrible.
Licking and grooming.
It's terrible.
Licking and grooming.
Yeah.
And but he claims, he shows that rat pups that are groomed and licked have lower stress levels than those who, or which, I don't know what you do for an animal, pronoun is there, but who are not licked and groomed. Now, yeah.
And who is supposed to do it?
Precisely. What I was going on to say is that the framework within which he makes the transposition from animal experiments to humans, so you're already imposing social values, pre-existing values. And what pre-existing values shape the questions that you ask, they shape the experimental design, and therefore they shape the answers that you get. You're making assumptions, therefore, about animals, their behaviour, and what you think of the kind of modifications to the genome that you discover. And you're interpreting them in ways which actually come out of deeply rooted assumptions about gendered responsibilities for caring, for looking after, for nurturing very young children. And as epigenetics research has continued, it's becoming clear that these changes are inherited, not just from cell to cell, but between generations. Sorry?
There's memes.
No. Actually, biologically and somatically, you can see modifications to the DNA. You can see gene methylation and histone modification. And these guys are trying to find, and they are guys, obviously, epigenetic marks for stress levels in they're originally looking in rats, and now they're transposing these experiments to humans. And the most recent paper is looking at epigenetic changes in children who have suffered child abuse. Sorry, the child abuse issue is a slightly different one for obvious reasons, in that, as we all know, that can be a very complex one. But obviously, the sociologists, I just use the term very loosely, but certain sociologists are picking up on this notion that what a mother does, before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and after pregnancy, will have long-lasting effects on the health, identity, and welfare of their child.
And the generations that follow.
And
if you make a bad job, then it's going to affect everybody down the line too.
I just wanted to sort of alert you to that, because I thought you might not know about
this. It's interesting to follow that up. It also fits in with the stuff about baby brain, how there's this thing about women lose their memory and their competencies. Well, that's all based on research with chimpanzees.
Yes, exactly.
They haven't done any on women.
No.
In my qualitative interviews...
They didn't they? They discovered at least that pregnancy increases brain function.
Yes, they did, you're right.
Some more
In my qualitative interviews, that's one question I always put to women, and they do say things like, well, I was perhaps more tired, particularly when I already had one child, but it didn't actually impact on my brain function at all, which is interesting.
I suppose the things that come out of that are about the abuses and abuses of science, because there is an epistemological question there, isn't it? How do we know what to trust? And most people don't.
Well,
but then the social agenda, the social and cultural agendas that are in play when this stuff is mobilised. It's been. I mean, you wouldn't pick it up if you weren't interested in epigenetics, but it's around.
Even if this is proved, then you can still ask. Yes. Still ask, what is the responsibility?
Absolutely,
what
exactly. What is the ethical questions, and can you do an anticipatory ethics about this?
And there are two things coming into my mind. One is, I don't know her first name, Harvey. She's yes, exactly. She didn't comment on this type of research, but she has very nicely undermines all those biological stories about mothers in the animal world. This is one thing. And the other thing is, I was thinking about is Selma Zevenhuizen, perhaps somebody knows her. She's a political scientist, and she brought up the term caring citizenship. And I think this is the other side. So you can ask society what will citizenship is everybody busy about, but caring citizenship, this has to be filled in. Perhaps it's a part of an answer to this biological danger. It's
very dangerous, particularly because it's presented as something which mediates between nature and nurture. The epigenetic, because of course, once the environment, I should have said that epigenetic responses are their responses to cues from the environment, including the maternal body, which is an environment, of course. So that's open to
sorts of uses. That's the other thing, that every generation of science has had its way of proving that everything's a mother's fault.
Yes.
I mean, it's a photogenic mother, for instance, that completely the attachment theory thing being that ghastly experiment with wild mothers.
And also the thing about donkey.
Yes, the baby monkeys who were attached to terry cloth mothers, and that then grew up apparently to be sort of chimpanzee versions of psychopaths. So everything has always been blamed on mothers. But it's a new way of doing it.
But it's more complicated as well, I think. It's crucially to say that if the environment is there,
it's stripping context.
That actually, theoretically, it's always the boundary between nature and nurture.
Yes,
you can change the environment, or at least this is theoretically that would be the corollary of that. If it really is true that these are responses to cues from the environment, then you can do something about the environment, can't you? We've always said we can't do anything about the essentialist narrative, so it's impossible because you can't do anything about that, and it's kind of stymied. So much kind of thinking.
But are you saying that bodily phenomena are not so easily to change? Is this what?
No, I'm saying that it's a more. It's. I think what I'm saying is that previous. I'm sorry, I'm taking all this. it may not. But I really thought it was important in relation to the discourses around maternal responsibility, because I'm having into this through the people who are working on this through the project, and they're already sort of talking about interventions.
So, Claire, I'm not sure. I can understand that maybe a mother can be told you have to lick and whatever your child, which can be done probably by a father or a carer. But what can a woman do about her own genes? What kind of intervention? Sorry, whatever the transformation are they going to come up with some kind of?
I shouldn't have brought it up because it is a very.
Are we going to come up with some behavioural rules of how we would have to?
I shouldn't have brought it up because it's a very complicated narrative. But basically, okay, DNA is something that we have. We share it with people in our family. People in our family, we're not really like them at all, because DNA is not what makes us what we are.
Okay,
what makes us what we are. No, there are lots of complex that are an interplay. There's a complex interplay between the DNA and its environment from the moment of fertilisation. And so the DNA becomes, as it were, it doesn't become anything, it's turned into RNA. RNA then in turn regulates DNA, gene methylation, histone modification, alter DNA. So that DNA is not really the point. What we are, the result of developmental processes, which are inordinately complex and different for every individual. But the point about it is that those responses and changes take place in response to A, the cellular environment, the cytoplasm, then the maternal body as the wider environment of those developing cells, the embryo, and then the environment of the child during the first 6 months of life. Okay. For example, crucial times of plasticity. Okay. So all those things are amenable to intervention and change, and they are somatic, but they're not deterministic in the way the gene narrative was. That's a danger, I think.
I'm afraid as chair of this session I have to try and curb it because we want to finish at 4:30, and I think we have, how many minutes? 6 minutes? Before that we were going to have a wider kind of reflection on question number 9 at the very end, but I think Claire actually did take us on quite a
I'm sorry.
You took us onto
wide questions of responsibility.
How disciplines all come together into the dictating new norms, maybe. Working towards creating new norms, but new norms that seem to anyway bring the mother into the center as the culprit or the agent of where things have to be actually controlled. So, what insights can literary narratives and representations relating to mothering and paid work offer to interdisciplinary discussion? If you would like to add anything, please speak now. Before I give a couple of minutes to Victoria to make an announcement about the social media. Would you like to say, to bring any more observations? No. We're all happy. Lisa, would you like to say something on the point?
I just want to slightly just correct something you said. Implying that, so I think I tried very carefully not to imply that my version of what a mother is necessarily female.
I realised that. Maybe I said. And I did think about what you said because, for example, while Tina was talking, I thought of caring for the elderly, for example, in Italy, is very often done by men, because men tend to, bachelors, to live with their mothers till the end of and they do take on even the care of the body for the mother, but they are not really interested yet in doing that for the children. And it may be because, again, we're talking about breastfeeding, all that stuff, and men have not actually got around to that. But there are different cases of caring also with the body that is been done, by, at least in Italy, by sons. So maybe there is a future for involving men in caring.
Can I ask a quick question? So I think, Tina, you were saying, the message of the gendered division of paternity and maternity leave. Does anyone know, any scientists know if they're, in countries where there's just parental leave that can be shared and it's not gendered, does that have any effect
neither you can share the parental leave, but usually men don't take it.
In Sweden, that's what I would say. As a Swede here today, I feel, where is the father? That's really, I think from 68 in Sweden, I thought that the way, if the mother goes out, the father has to come in the house. And and it feels like, in a sense, we're living in different worlds. Even though in Sweden we're not happy because only 25% or a bit less of the days for 16 months are taken out by the father.
Do you have dedicated, like the daddy quota in Denmark? Do you have where the man has to take, the father has to take some leave? You have 2 months, okay. Because that's something that we were, some colleagues and I were writing in terms of the new policy coming in here, to have dedicated, that seems to work better than not having, just having it open.
Well, they're paid, it's normal pay.
90%?
I'm not expert. 80%. But I just heard that when I was in Sweden 2 weeks ago, something like that, about the dedicated period for fathers, that there is a change coming. It used to be that if the father didn't take his dedicated time, it was shaved off the available parental leave. It's kind of retribution almost. But that is not going to happen in the future, apparently. So it's...
so what, the mother has it? It gets
yes, she can take it instead. But the father isn't sort of made to.
There's another discourse. I mean, the leftist discourse on wanting to share it 60, it's about 50-50. Make it really individual.
Janica wanted to add something.
There was something I was shocked preparing for this workshop. This was the research report, Realities of Mothers in Europe, and I can't really judge or assess if they are encapsulated in a special discourse. But this report says that in Norway and Sweden, the pay differential between men and women has been greater in Sweden than it was 4 decades ago, and greater than at present in countries with less developed parental leave and subsidized care. So they make a link between that. And also employment tends to become more segregated. I can't judge it, but this was just in the report, with women mainly in the lower paying public sector jobs. And what's worse, statisticians noted that in countries with high number of women in the labor force, the gender pay gap is greater. So there is something going on there that we shouldn't idealize several of these regulations or arrangements, because it's slapped back to women, it seems. And then the final remark was, housewives have become so stigmatized that they are embarrassed to be known as such. Well, is this the world we want? I want for myself. This is just, there seems to be an extreme possible tool there that we don't want. It's all in the report.